Hello, Idle Hero fans. Thank you for tuning in today for episode 2, or I should say more appropriately, part 2 of my faction-based tier list. And for this episode, we're going to be looking at Forest faction. And this is, like, I've specifically stated last time, if you watched the last video, that I feel Abyss kind of gets a bit of slack for being the worst faction. But I don't really think that's the case anymore, at least if you take in the overall perspective, because the bottom two picks for this faction are kind of not relevant, especially the last pick. And I'm going to jump into that right now. I think the 5th best unit for Forest is probably Dragon Slayer, and this is such a hard pick to make because you could probably make a case for Faceless or the Grey-Eyed. I'm going to go with Dragon Slayer, though, just because I think that despite the fact that he doesn't do as much damage as quickly as those units, he does do enough damage considering how tanky he is. But the problem here is that this cannot be construed in any way of me saying Dragon Slayer is a good hero. Dragon Slayer is not a good hero. But because the pool of good heroes in Forest is so shallow, you end up with scenarios where you have to pick something. If you're forced to pick a top 5, Dragon Slayer is kind of the one who's going to be just almost by default the winner of the 5th spot. He was recently buffed, so he's a little bit better than he used to be, but he's still kind of like a big HP wall, and tanks have really moved on from that status since like the past like month or 2 months even. And he really hasn't. He's still a big, just a HP wall. The reason why I do give him a little bit of an edge over the other lower tier heroes is that he also has an armor reduction. So at least he's helping your other heroes take down your opponents. Whereas the other ones are kind of just single target focused, and they don't really, they're just doing shitty damage instead of actually making like a dent against your opponent. But again, do not level up Dragon Slayer. He's just kind of the de facto winner by default. You can't, but do not put this guy on your team. Number 4 is going to be Groo. And Groo is kind of a weird one to see down this far, because there was a time when Groo was considered probably the 2nd best Forest hero before people really got to know how powerful other ones were. And Groo has fallen off because he does do a decent amount of damage with his counterattacks, and he is pretty tanky, but it's not really fast. Like, his damage is elongated over the course of 6 and 7 rounds, where if he gets hit a lot, and you have like the perfect setup where you have a HP gem on him, as well as having damage reduction, that I think it's called Heart of Oak, which gives him damage reduction as well as a shitload of HP. Then he starts to be like a little bit higher tier. He starts to move up a bit because he becomes very hard to deal with at that point. But I don't think that 95% of people are going to have that setup. So it's really hard to justify putting him any higher than this, because as I was saying in the last video about the warrior meta, if you want a warrior on your team, he has to do damage. And while Groo does do a bit of damage, it's not enough. It's not like the other warriors that are currently relevant. And that's just, it's kind of sad because he's another one of those relics of the past that was very underused at the beginning of the game. Then, even though he got no buffs, he became incredibly powerful when people realized how tanky he was. And then he just kind of got nerfed, and then he got power crept. So other tanky units ended up just doing his job a little bit better, and it's just, he's kind of fallen to the wayside now, and I think that's where he's going to be until they fix either him or just the way warriors work in general right now, which is kind of sad, but there's not too much you can do about it. So number 3 is going to be a bit of a surprise, and that is Edgar. And Edgar, I think right now is a kind of a sleeper, overpowered hero, in the same vein that Margaret is kind of that way. I think he's even more so than Margaret, because I think a lot of people on the official server have woken up to Margaret. They've seen how strong she is, and it's pretty obvious. I think Edgar has kind of flown under the radar, though. He was released after or simultaneously with Flame Strike, and that is arguably the point in time when the devs of the game kind of just started throwing out overpowered heroes to kind of convince you to buy them. But he was paired with arguably still the second strongest unit in the game in Flamestrike, but he was very underwhelming, and it was kind of surprising because you expected him to be very strong just due to the natural way that they had started releasing heroes that were just too powerful, kind of baiting the purchases. But he was very weak. Now, I'm not sure exactly what the details of it were, but I also heard that there was a glitch or a bug on the private server where he wasn't doing his damage properly. But since then, that bug has actually been fixed. And not only that, but they actually buffed his damage. So his attack is not that high, but his ability does 128% damage, but also heals him for 120% and can't be dodged. I mean, seems like everything can't be dodged now. Mickey's just like turning in her grave, like just spinning right now. She's a fucking spin top fidget spinner Beyblade, whatever generation you're from. But nothing can be dodged anymore. And the stats on this are pretty reasonable. 128 times 3 is a nice chunk of damage. Then you have Warsong Roar, which is each attack grants himself with 24% crit damage and 10 speed, and heals himself for 45% attack. Now, this doesn't seem to have a cap or a timer, so this just keeps going. If he gets like to round 4 or 5, he's going to have over 100% crit damage. He's going to have a shitload of speed, and he's just kind of sustaining very well with a decent base HP. And now we have this Brave Edgar, which is kind of a variation of the move that Kareem had, the rear strike attack, or passive that Kareem has, where if he gains 25% crit and 25% attack as a backline hero, or he gets 50% as a frontline hero. And I think this is where he really shines, is that because of this, he has now become one of those backline tanks, where you can put him in the 3rd spot. He'll do good damage, but he also stops your second slot hero from getting access too early in the fight. So for example, if your opponent just murks your back row with like 40 to 50,000 damage like 4 times, and most of your back row is dead, he still might survive with a few extra turn or HP and last a turn or 2 longer, which means that abilities that hit the back row are not going to get to your hero in the 2nd row, which is usually your strongest hero. So, excuse me, not only is he going to be doing good damage, but he also kind of protects your front row a little bit from abilities. But the key here is that 25% attack as a back row. This is one of the few times that you see an attack modifier that isn't already added into the base. So that 6100, if you put him in a back row, has to be multiplied by the 0.125 to get the true value of it. And now we have this Frenzied Howl, which is kind of, these are the kind of abilities I generally don't like, which is while below 30% health, increases his attack by 25% and crit by 35% for 3 rounds. Now, while this isn't my favorite type of attack, or I just don't like attacks that generally activate once you're at 30% health, because there's very low circumstances that your character is actually going to survive to use these abilities. I don't think it's too bad because his base HP is pretty high. His armor is fair, it's not great. But because his HP is pretty respectable, he's probably going to live past the first barrage of abilities. And then once he does, he might be close to 30%. And that means for the next 3 rounds, his crit is going to be 35 plus the 25% that you get here. So that means over half of his attacks are going to be crits. And he is going to be smashing enemies. Because you also get the another attack bonus here. Like 25% attack again. So he's essentially getting a 50% attack bonus, which puts him somewhere at like 9,000 attack when this activates. And that makes him very, very strong. And the crits just start to go insane. And then you have to consider that depending on how long the fight has been, if that's on like the 3rd or 4th turn that he starts attacking with this, he's also going to have 100% crit damage on top of having 50% crit, just the normal crit stat. So half of his attacks are going to crit, and the ones that do are going to be having an insane multiplier. And that's where the damage really comes from with Edgar, and it's very surprising. I highly suggest if you know anyone in like your guild, or if you have someone in your friends list that has an Edgar that's like of a decent level, so like level 8 or 9, just try to have like a few practice fights with them, and then check the DPS score, and you'll see Edgar is a sleeper strong hero right now. So number 2 is kind of, this is where it gets really hard to actually define, but I think it has to be Demon Hunter. And it really goes back to that video I was talking about with the crowd control mechanic that was not really known so much. Now, Demon Hunter is still amazingly powerful. Her silence is amazingly good. If you can hit a silence on 4 people, which is not that unrealistic, it's not that highly improbable to hit a silence for 4 people, you've pretty much just won the game based on that. Despite the fact that they are going to be powering up if they survive because of the silence and the way that the energy built like overflow works, not having their abilities used on the 2nd turn until like the 5th turn is just super detrimental. It's so bad for your opponent to have that happen, because you're going to cycle through pretty much 2 abilities before they get their 1. And that's most of the damage these days is coming from abilities. There's very few instances where basic attacks are really doing the damage, and because of that, Demon Hunter is super powerful. And now, in saying that too, that's actually something I wouldn't mind seeing, kind of a cooler concept where you'd see a ramping up basic attack unit, that their passives and stuff like that don't really rely or kind of boost up their base attack or work in some way to modify crit, where their basic attack is their primary form of a power, because that way it would kind of limit the silence's strength as well, and it would be an effective counter. And I think that's the kind of thing that the devs really haven't explored too much on, is like the soft counters where you can still be effective, but they don't like completely shut down a hero, because that's kind of what they've done to Mickey right now, where it's like dodge was super relevant, but instead of adding a few counterplay elements, they just like, nah, let's just kill her, let's just throw her on the ground. And that's really unfortunate. I don't think that's really how you should balance a game, but that's neither here nor there. Regardless, Demon Hunter is like an average DPS unit, does pretty good damage, but ultimately the silence is where the real power comes from, which is it's really funny, because if you go back to my original video where I was talking about Demon Hunter, I mentioned that even if she didn't have her silence, she would be super overpowered, which might have been true back then, but definitely isn't true anymore. If she didn't have that silence, she would be terrible. But regardless, she does have it, and she's very strong. And the number 1 pick is probably pretty obvious, and that's Rosa. I think Rosa is pretty undisputed as the best forest hero at this point. Shout out to Drip for always kind of pushing the Rosa agenda. He was pretty like in tune with Rosa's power a lot quicker than most people were, especially if you combine Rosa with Ormus, because you have Rosa that debuffs your opponent, and you have Ormus that heals your own allies, which makes it very hard to actually kill your units. And if you pair that with certain heroes like Brea that just go crazy over time, Edgar would be another one, giving those guys time to ramp up is really, really dangerous. And that's what Rosa and Ormus really allow you to do. So you look at like his first ability, it's very simple, and that's one of the cool things about Rosa, is that he's a very simplistic priest, but he just does a lot of stuff. He does a pretty weak attack, because he's only got 7,200 base attack, and he does 66% attack as a base damage, but he reduces your opponent's attack by 10 and boosts your attack by 16. So that's effective like 26% a shift in power. 10 from them, 26 on your end. And that is really effective. That is more effective than an aura faction bonus from any faction, essentially. At least the power side of it, like the attack or skill damage or armor break or anything like that. Of course, the HP is going to be a different thing. But this ability can essentially nullify aura factions. Or if they don't have if neither of you have an aura faction, the way you can look at this ability is that if you have a team full of 9-star units versus a team full of 9-star units on your opponent's side, this essentially makes it so your opponent is fighting with 8 stars and you're fighting with 9.5 stars, and that's just brutal. His first passive is pretty generic. You can tell that he's kind of an older hero, because if he was made today, he would have like HP plus 30, speed plus 53, and like armor plus 17,000. But because he's an older hero, he's only got the one static HP plus 30. His third ability is reduces all enemies' armor by 18. Now this is a weird way to word this, because this just means when he attacks, all of your opponent's enemies lose their armor. And that adds into his first ability again as well, where he makes your team hit like a truck, because you're getting 16% attack plus 18% armor reduction. And I can check right now, just for curiosity's sake, how high does that actually go. That goes up to 20.4 when you get him to level 8. I don't know what the hell that 20.4 is. 0.4? Wow, that's very specific math. I feel like the devs did not go into a specific like testing program to ensure that the numbers were so balanced that they had to give him 0.1% or 0.4% to fix the balance issues. But whatever. But either way, this is making your team even stronger. And his last ability is kind of a moot point, actually. That's one of the surprising things, is he's one of the few heroes that has an ability that's not that relevant, but is still very impactful once it does go off. And that increases your allies' armor by 35% when his HP drops below 50. And that's why you might see him being used as a tank every now and then, because he's going to get his ability off because he's very fast. His natural speed is pretty high, and the fact that you have the priests get speed from their guild tree, and you probably should be running a speed gem on him as well. Speed artifact, make sure he goes first, because if he gets his debuff off before any of your opponents attack, they're in trouble. So if he gets his ability off and then drops below 35% HP, maybe even dies, he's going to give your whole team that huge armor buff, which makes it harder for them to get one shot. And that's obviously super important. So yeah, guys, I'm pretty sure Rosa is the undisputed champion of green. If you guys have any differing opinions, let me know in the comments below. I'm pretty sure there are going to be some differing opinions, especially on the number 5 pick, because Dragon Slayer, you could pick Dragon Slayer, you could pick Faceless. You maybe even could pick Starlight if you just wanted to base it on the fact that Starlight is pretty effective in the Brave trial. But I mean, that's up to you. Like I said in the last video, this is mostly based on PvP, and Starlight is not a good PvP unit, despite how she is actually pretty effective in the Brave trial, as well as the Aspen dungeon. Actually, that might be something a little underrated. Her ability to fight in Aspen is pretty strong. But yeah, guys, if you liked the video, make sure to drop it a like and subscribe if you want to see more content. And comment below if you have any opinions, or if you have any recommendations for like any videos you want to see in the upcoming future. Of course, I'm going to be continuing this series, but after that, I'm always open to ideas. So thank you very much for watching, and have a nice day.